Part of the trouble with the mental health system is that they take authority over our inner experience, our subjective experience, and then they tell us what that experience means according to their training. But they can't stop us from figuring out our own meanings internally. And my eyes are kind of squinty because I feel really tired. I had to wake up earlier today than usual. And I'm wondering if we're not bipolar, but we're non-dual. We get in touch with non-dual consciousness. And I don't know much about non-duality. But when the non-dual consciousness comes in, it feels so wonderful, and it goes into magicalness. But then around others who know us, who don't operate that way, we manifest as non-dual in that we manifest as sort of the sum totality of the chaos of that situation. And we act it out. And it's showing that we're not this consistent person, but the medical system insists, no, it's a consistent person suffering from inconsistency. There's a person in there, but there isn't a person in there. But I don't think people want to know this. They really don't. Unless maybe they're spiritual seekers. But that's the thing, people who get diagnosed with a mental illness, they're not spiritual seekers, but they get in contact with that non-dual consciousness because it can contact anyone at any time. One doesn't have to be looking for it or even know anything about it. But then if we don't, then we get tricked in so many different ways. We get tricked by the ego, and so we build a big ego out of it, and then it collapses, and it's really painful. This crisis I just experienced, I haven't felt any depression. I felt low energy, but no subjective me who is experiencing depressed energy. So there's no real mood attached to it. It is the ego self that wants it to be a certain way that creates a mood out of it. And it's also the resistance to the chaos of it. And part of why I manifest this chaos is to see the chaos that's still within, stored in the body. And the body can be kicking and screaming sometimes. And then when one doesn't act out the stuff, one doesn't act out the chaos that wants to be acted out through the body so others can come and capture that person in order to get them to be reinterpreted as a separate self. When one doesn't act it out, then the body experiences pain of those patterns dissolving from the nervous system. So it's possibly a physically painful process. But then when one looks at that without calling it pain, without giving it a word, because if we call it pain, then it is necessarily going to be felt as bad, which is resistance, which is the ego. So if we're experiencing it as an ego, we're not really experiencing it. We're not able to transform it. It's going to be translated into something else. So the ego is the translation And it's going to translate it into my pain, my body, my this, my that, identification. But if one doesn't do that, if the approach is from neutrality, it's just sort of what's happening. When one is with what's happening, one realizes that what's happening changes. It never stays the same. So the ego would want constant pleasure, and then so when there's pain, it resists that. So things are either pleasure or pain. I'm leaving today, going back home, and I think I feel ready inside. So this was definitely a good decision to come here and be with those lower states of consciousness by myself. Because the thing is, it seems like when others around me know me, who think they know me, are around me, they can sense that energy, and they literally sometimes come up to me and yell at me. And that makes it worse. Whereas if I'm with it by myself, nobody comes up and yells at me, so I can be with the energy in consciousness without it attracting like experiences. And it did do that a little bit, and I think that's why that dog attacked me, and I think that's why the other girl was letting her dog shake on me. It was like those lower states. They try to, when one feels a little bit disturbed, others pick up on the energy, and disturbing things happen. So it's good to be on one's own at that point. It's probably too windy out here to talk, but I'm making my journey back, and I'll try to meet with that guy who's doing the private peer support, and meet with a new friend I made who's doing something cool, and see what's going on. But I also feel like I could get a job. I do have a job, but it's casual, so I could get more work. And I might only be able to go to California from October to December. So we'll see what happens. We're gonna see what happens. See you later, ocean. So I'm back home now, and I'm in an infrared sauna. I'm gonna try and do a sauna every day this week that I can. I probably can't on Wednesday or Friday, but Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. And I went to the store and bought some grapefruits because I might try to do 3 days on grapefruits. I'm not sure if it's a good idea because I am taking quetiapine and trazodone, and sometimes grapefruits aren't the best thing to have while having medications, but whatever, I'll try it at least for today and see how I feel tonight when I try to sleep. And then after that, I might try to switch to fruit. We will see, because that would be an experiment. It would be seeing how I do on just fruit. I know somebody who is a fruitarian and they're really active and fit, and I'm just wondering if fruit will have some kind of epigenetic effect and give my brain more energy. I have also read that it's good to not have any sugar, and then that way blood sugar issues don't happen. But I did eat, when I first tried raw food years ago, I did this plan called eco eating through a guy called Sapoti Brook, and it was basically eat 2 pieces of fruit every 2 hours or something, and then have a bit of greens, at least 400 grams of greens, and celery, like 4 celery sticks a day or something. So I could do that too, but I might try to do the fruit, because if I keep my blood sugar up by having fruit consistently, and also fruit is more natural and the body recognizes it and processes it more easily, then maybe my brain will have more energy. So that's kind of what I'm going for, is more consistent brain energy. And I've talked with myself about how I am nature. And if that's true, if I eat things that are of nature, that's more congruent. And the times in the past where I've done pretty much 100% raw food, I've felt the best. And I haven't been doing that for over 2 years. But when I was doing it, I felt really good. And I'm not saying it's the only way, but I'm going to experiment with that. Also, it'll be kind of cleansing. So, before I started talking to myself, before that really scary hospitalization that I had, I took pretty good care of myself. I did things like a 10 series of Rolfing massages, which was really amazing. And I did like 6 sessions of colon hydrotherapy. I think that was in 2015. So 2015 I did that, and or maybe before that. I can't remember when I did the colon hydrotherapy. But I sort of invested a couple $1,000s a year in taking care of my body and cleansing it, and that doesn't even include the food. I was pretty good with the quality of food that I had and did a lot of raw food for quite a long time. And I think that's one way to increase one's vibration. It's not the only way, but for me, the way my brain seems to be working right now is that it's hard to have any kind of contrived motive or pattern. So when I say, oh yeah, I want to do yoga twice a week for the next however, my brain doesn't really work that way. I can't really make some kind of plan like that. Whereas eating, well, I pretty much have to eat unless I did something like a 40-day water fast, which I'm not going to do at this moment. But so eating's not necessarily a pattern, but I can decide to buy fruit at the grocery store as opposed to whatever it is that I would otherwise buy. On the island, I was eating a lot of nut butter and Laura bars sometimes, and carrot sticks and hummus. And I did cook the Indian sauce and lentils and broccoli sometimes. And I enjoy that. But I don't have a kitchen right now. And so I do have a fridge. So eating a fruit diet is congruent with the tools that I have at hand. And so we'll try it. I'm saying that today, I might change tomorrow, and I'm okay with that. Because part of what I'm learning is that it's really hard to create any kind of pattern or routine or habit. I think that might be more possible if I had a place where I was living where I was really comfortable, and then feeling comfortable went out and got maybe a bit more work. Right now it seems really hard to do that though, because today I was in my room until 1. I don't think I was sleeping for the last hour or so, but I went to bed before midnight, probably 11:30, and I didn't get up until 1. So I think these medications, they're helping me sleep, but they're also making me more tired. And I think that's okay for now, because the more I sleep, the less my brain gets speeded up. And then the less it gets sped up, perhaps it is easier to stay grounded in linearity. So for me, it's not about getting things done right now. It's staying grounded in this reality. And I do feel kind of okay being back. I feel a little bit resistant. I don't really like where I'm living. And I think it's because the possibilities that exist there. So when I was on the island, there was no possibility of certain people just coming and deciding to yell at me for no reason. That would be very unlikely. I got a little bit attacked by a dog and a little bit of water shaking off on me by a dog, and that was it. So even though I was in a crisis, there was no real possibility for others to come and harm me in any way. And this includes if I was in a really stressful situation and then I was feeling distress, then the chances of me calling for help would increase, and then the help that I would get isn't really the help that I want. So it's not really help. It's just sort of deciding that I can't do it on my own. It's not really help. It's just going through the process with other beings, and then other beings are doing things that I don't want, like psychiatry or people around me. They sort of get caught in that awful energy, and they end up doing things that they don't necessarily want to do either. Like, who wants to take their family member to the hospital? Nobody. So they end up having to do something that they don't want to do. So by me being able to contain it myself, they don't have to do things they don't want to do either. The sauna isn't really getting hotter than 98 degrees. I've seen it go up to like 130. Well, I'm still sweating a little bit. I just might have to stay in here longer. And, yeah, so that's what I'm considering. And I found before when I would do raw food, people would come up to me and ask me, what are you doing? Like, what, this and that. Whereas, and it's more body focused thing, whereas I think the air conditioning's on and it's making it harder for this thing to heat up. Oh well. So yeah, body focused things as opposed to mind focused things. Like, one could machinate about the mind forever, and that's what I was sort of doing. And I'm wondering if focusing on the body for a while would be good and not really so much on the mind, because I've made metaphors with myself in infinite different ways, and I think through the process of being away for the month, I realized certain things. Like, certain things my brain has been trying to figure out, it sort of came to an understanding of. but without being so afraid of it. Because it's sort of frightening, but not at the same time. Like I went through lots of states of fear, but that which I was afraid of there's no need to fear it. So one can go through the process and look at it with fear, and that creates all sorts of chaos. And then one can go through the process and be neutral, and the process just goes on and kind of completes itself. But since we don't understand the process, it's fearful. So then we ask for help, and then we ask for help, we're called mentally ill. When basically some of the stuff that happens is physically impossible. But then the brain sees that those are possible. And I think what it has to do with partly is operating in a quantum way. So, people talk about this in books, like the book Becoming Supernatural, and there was another book that I quickly browsed when I was away, just quickly, and it talks about quantum. But when people can get into the quantum state and not know what the hell's going on, it is freaking scary, and it creates all kinds of chaos. So I think it's not as much about, well, anything's fine, but I think people who have this happen, who have it happen through awful circumstances, need help in understanding this. Because there's people who are in fine circumstances and their life's going on somewhat fine, but they're suffering and they don't really like how things are going, but they're still somewhat stable and they're able to investigate and try what the books are saying. But then there are people who go into that through trauma. And I think part of how it happens is that if somebody is in a not great situation and they have to get out of it, a larger capacity in the brain has to be activated in order to get that person out of it. So if I'm identified with my body and say my body is incapacitated, or say somebody's unconscious for some reason, my hand is kind of shaking. If I'm unconscious, I can't see through my eyes. But what we are is something greater than our body. So there's the body. Dr. David Hawkins, I think, explains it. The body is experienced through the mind, and the mind is experienced through consciousness, and consciousness is experienced in awareness. And I would say awareness is emptiness, and it's unknown, but it's all knowing. So when one is in danger, awareness knows it, and awareness is aware of the whole situation. So awareness would be able to see the whole room. Awareness would be able to see everything going on around it within its ability. Who knows what that is? And awareness would then be able to, at the right moment, get the body out of there. Not the body getting the body out of there. So if somebody was incapacitated and then all of a sudden they get up and start running at the right moment and get themselves to safety, it wasn't because their eyes could see what to do. Awareness calculates it. And awareness is what collapses the wave function around the possibility of the body surviving. And that might only be one possibility, but there could be multiple possibilities. So what I'm saying is the brain has to go into a state of possibility, and it has to go into a higher energy state in order to ensure the survival of the body. And usually we don't operate in that state. It is possible that one day human beings will operate in that state naturally. Will be trained to operate in that way through education, and also it's possible that we'll be born into that way of operation through the brain operating that way in the parents. But it doesn't even matter about that. It's just a matter of also whether the environment and the human created environment is that which can help facilitate possibility, moving based on possibility and creativity and synchronicity, versus moving based on programmed thought, projections, and following patterns, which is less and less what my brain is able to do. So what I'm saying is, it's sort of a paradox, or an unfortunate thing, that the way we've designed society, we're able to sort of go around sleepwalking and on autopilot. So thought is going on in the brain and the body is on autopilot. We drive the car, we don't even know how we got there because we were in the thinking realm the whole time. So if there's a traumatic situation where the body feels like, oh my God, I have to survive, awareness knows and activates the field of possibility, so that the field of possibility gets the body the hell out of there. And this messes up the brain in many ways because it doesn't know how that happened. One realizes, I didn't get up and get out of there. All of a sudden something was getting me out of there. And so what I'm saying is, wherever the possibility was for that body to survive is what one is now thrust along in as a future path. But not even a future path. One basically had the impossible happen, which is, maybe I'm not this localized entity in a human body, localized in the head. Maybe I'm something more. And I'm not saying people think in that way, but there's an awareness of that. And then when there's an awareness of that, it makes it very challenging after to operate in a reality based on Newtonian things, because when the brain can see what's possible, it sees what's possible when it goes along Newtonian lines again, which is eventual demise. One can feel the future of every possibility in a way, because one had to feel the future of the possibilities in the state of being in a bad situation in order to find the possibility where one survives. But then one also realizes there were many, many possibilities that one didn't survive. And so one becomes aware of multiple realities, parallel worlds. And, that's, I feel, part of why afterwards, if one is traumatized, it leads to a high probability of so-called mental illness. Because one can see and feel possibilities, and if one was living one's life along a certain line, that line died. And now one exists in a realm of possibilities. And there are certain areas of linear reality where one doesn't exist. And it's also possible that it's kind of hard to explain, but it's possible that one's brain starts working in a different way, and if it does, then one has a different function or needs to function in a different way. But part of mental health recovery is trying to get people to function in the old way. And since that led to trauma in a lot of cases, the brain is very resistant to going back to living in that way. One can see the subtle violence because maybe one wasn't aware of the subtle violence, and that's what got one into a traumatic situation. Or, people can be traumatized by the ones that are supposed to love them. So they realize that's not love. And the thing is that when one survives, one kind of realizes in a way that love is that which saved them. Love is the awareness, the bigger field of what we are. And so after the brain gets traumatized by the Newtonian way, it really needs a lot of love in order to be able to flower. And most people aren't given that type of environment. And it's a lot more complicated than that, but I've been on this so-called mental health journey for 7 years now. And the sauna won't go above 96. It's okay. I can stay in for an hour and a half then. But I sort of realized that it was a pretty shitty outcome or possibility to go into, but I realized what other possibilities I survived. And I don't know why. Well, there could be reasons why, for sure. But it's challenging to talk about because it wouldn't make any sense to people. And I'm not sure if I'm supposed to talk about it, though I probably have talked about it in my videos all along. But going through this last month, I really realized that a lot of what I said is true. But then the brain actually coming to terms with it. There's a difference between intellectualizing it. I guess what I'm trying to say is all these anomalies that I've experienced, they sort of started to make sense. I was able to see them this last month without being afraid of it. Because the truth is, there's nothing to fear. And part of what we need to learn is how to die and what death is. And death is death of the self. we don't experience death of the body. But the self can die many times in one lifetime of the body. And the thing is, if one went into a quantum brain state, the self is Newtonian. So any movement of the self or of a Newtonian fashion to accumulate, to be better, all this stuff, better as a self, like as this invisible entity that's not there. If we start to build that, that's what has to die. So that's what I'm wondering about, is not building the self. And it's seeming to me that the brain less and less is able to do that. And so the process that I went through this last month, I think it was more of the self dying, and it's painful. The self, when it dies, tries to inflict pain on the body. And part of the reason it does that, it seems, I don't know if this is the reason it does it, or part of the reason it does it, or what happens when we misunderstand what's happening. So I was in pain in my body, and that one day or night when that substance seemed to be released from my heart and it's diffused through my body, and I felt extreme fear for a bit and pain. It only lasted 2 minutes, but if I immediately acted on it and say it called for help, that creates the medical system. That creates the medical system out of my misunderstanding of the death of the self. Now, I think in the beginning it's really hard to not create that. It's really hard to not create the medical system out of the death of the self. And then the self also causes physical pain in the body, supposedly. But when I was able to be with that neutrally, it changed and changed from pain to sort of this burning and this release of heat. So I literally think that's sort of the burning up of the self, because the self, the thoughts that are the accumulation of the self, are innervated in all of our nerves and our musculature. So it makes sense that there would be some kind of release when the self, which is nothing but a bunch of thoughts. So it's not exactly nothing, but it's the thoughts that would puppet our body. So, if I'm in body pain, I would say, oh, I need to go to the doctor and get a pain pill or something. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, because I'm still taking some psych meds at night, but I'm wondering about this process of the death of the self. So I'm thinking, once I have a better living situation where that situation doesn't induce resistance, like I don't like what's possibly possible in the situation I live in now. It's just not the right epigenetic matrix. I don't like the way I manifest and gesture. And I can practice changing that for sure, but it's not where I want to be, I don't think. So I'm not going to attempt to come off medication right away, because there'll be a lot that needs to be released because the medication is blocking that. And anything that it blocks accumulates in the body, I think. So cleansing might be one way to get rid of some of that energy. But it's not good that this infrared sauna won't heat up more. I'll see about finding out if I can turn off the air conditioning or something, but I am sweating, just not as much my legs. So yeah, I want to do this fruit thing, possibly. We'll see, because I don't really hold myself to anything. And yeah, I've made notes on some stuff. I don't know, I feel like changing the conversation. To what exactly, I don't know, but yeah, I have to get some practical things done now that I'm back, and yeah, and last night I didn't sleep the greatest. I felt like I was dreaming a lot, and then I just sort of felt like I didn't sleep that much. But since I was in there for 13 hours, I must have slept quite a bit. But it's that feeling that I didn't sleep the greatest. But I guess I did. And it was sort of nice to be in the pitch black room again. I wish, in a way, that I could move out of this whole trying to keep myself alive perspective to being able to share and help more in some way, but I don't even know what way that would be. I don't even really like the concept of help. Because what I've been trying to learn is understanding things for myself, so then I don't need help. Because when I ask for help, people help me in ways that they think are going to help, but they're not necessarily helpful. So it was interesting how I was feeling a lot of sort of anxiety before I left, and then as soon as I got to the island, it went away. And then I felt fine for about 3 weeks, and then I did have a bit of a crisis. But, you know, had I stayed home and that anxiety built up and up and up, it would have been worse. So I think something I learned was being ready to just sort of drop everything and go. And that's, again, the discontinuous part is, you know, it's hard to build up some kind of consistent lifestyle when one has to go away for a month in order to not be hospitalized or something. But it was very mild compared to what it's been before. And usually the tough part can last about 3 months. So I have a ways to go. But, you know, if this is still the tough time, it could easily turn into something not good. So I might go away again in August, maybe. Just because I'm trying to keep afloat until I go away, if I go away. We'll see. I just opened this book and I went to this page. That's what I was just talking about with myself in the sauna. It says, you said before that people do not actually experience their own death. That is true, blah, 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 blah. The work of Dr. David Hawkins is really, really good. This is part of another thing I was talking about on Dr. David Hawkins' book, Healing and Recovery, page 29. He says, he's talking about when one reaches the level of consciousness of love. And he says on page 29, brain neurotransmitters change, beginning with the release of endorphins, which open up millions of banks of neurons that up to this time have been waiting for this energy field to activate them. So that's something I was talking about in different words to imply that a brain changes in its operation from Newtonian to quantum. And that's what he's saying on page 28. He said, this eventually leads to a paradigm jump at consciousness level 500, love. Where reason is linear and objective, love is a different dimension, as it is non-linear and subjective. So, and then he's saying when that love happens, it opens up millions of banks of neurons that were waiting for that energy. So there's an energy that activates these brain cells. And he says scientists are currently researching the whole field of endorphins. Example, oxytocin is associated with concern for others and socialization. And in my videos before, I talked about oxytocin consciousness. I think when that we get to that level, it's a completely different way of operating, but those old ways of operating are still there too sometimes. And we do eventually fall into the old ways of operating again. So this is a really good book. Reading Dr. David Hawkins' work a little bit again makes sense. Here's the other thing that I was talking about. It says people who have near-death occurrences experience those fields over 600, including their own higher self. So, without knowing about his work, it's hard to feel that. But he's saying that, you know, a near-death experience opens up higher states of consciousness. It's amazing right now. I found organic grapefruit. So here goes 3 days on grapefruits. I'm already half a day through.